Welcome to day 21 of the CRaFTi Advent series, not long to go now until the end. Today's video is one that I did quite a long time ago, and it's using magazine freebie again, but you know, there's lots of companies have brought out sets like this recently with door dies and that kind of stuff, so I'm sure you can find something that's a kind of similar idea if you wanted to recreate this card. So I'm embossing the door folder in white and in the teal colour because I want the door frame and the door. And then I'm also embossing a piece of card with a brick embossing folder. If you had a stencil, you could equally emboss it with the stencil as well. And then I'm going to die cut that into a rectangle. I probably should have done it the other way around, so I didn't like squash the embossing, but I didn't seem to squash it too bad. Then I'm using the Scripty Wishes die from Fawn. It was one of my favourite dies, this one. And I'm cutting it twice from the turquoise colour and once from white. And later on you'll see me stacking them up to make more of a thicker chipboardy kind of word embellishment for the card. I just think it adds something to your card. Makes it look really nice having that thicker sentiment on it. This card is also one of the ones that's currently sitting next to me on my shelf. It's so weird how I went through like over 600 videos and I managed to pick out practically every single one where I still have the card sitting on my shelf. But anyway, so I'm just trimming around the actual door from the turquoise one. And then from the white, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to use that big sort of porch and column section around the door. I tried it, but in the end it was a bit too big for my kind of small cards and it looked a bit too fancy. I wanted it to just look more like a normal house. But I was just using my big scissors and then the little scissors to snip all the little bits away. If you knew in advance that you weren't going to use that whole outside piece, you could have used a smaller piece of card and embossed it as well. And I'm just using my guillotine to trim around the edge to get that, just that little door frame. It just needs a door frame. And I'm just using a little bit of hickory smoke, a really light hand of it, just to add on some shading to the door frame. I know I'm going to make the background like a proper kind of house brick colour, but you know, door frames are always dirty, so just needed a little bit of colour on it. And then I'm using, I think that's evergreen bough, just to add a little bit of extra colour to the door as well. I think when you're using plain coloured card, it just steps it up so much just to add a little bit of ink blending to it as well. It just makes it look 10 times better, in my opinion anyway. So for the brick colours, I'm using spiced marmalade, and then I think that's brushed corduroy, gathered twigs, and then walnut stain as well. So a mixture of all of them, just to get that kind of house brick sort of a colour. You can also do this brick effect with grey tones as well. I did a Halloween card, well, probably like 2 years ago now, using that same embossing folder and adding a door on that as well, I think. But I did it with the grey tones because that just looks more like castle brick or something. Oh, and here I'm taking the walnut stain ink pad and actually doing the direct paper technique and dragging it across to really darken up the bricks. And then I wanted to warm it up a little bit, so I've just taken some, well, I think that might actually be fired brick, distress ink, just to add a little bit of warmth to them. Decided the door frame needed to be a little bit darker now because of the deep background. Then I thought I needed a doorstep because otherwise it's just floating in midair. So I add a little doorstep, and later on I also cut a piece as like a bigger doorstep thing as well. And then I'm stamping the word Christmas to go with the wishes. I think it says, oh, it says Christmas wishes, but I've just used Christmas on it, and I'm going to add the letterbox and the door knocker on it as well. I was thinking a lot at this point, couldn't decide what I wanted to do. I couldn't decide whether grey writing on white would look better or grey writing on grey would look better, so I did both and then I could pick later on. And then I'm stamping on the letterbox and the door knocker, but you'll see in a second I just decided it wasn't dark enough, so I went back in with a dark grey pen and just went over it. I think that's a much easier way of doing it, especially when they're really simple images like that. If you tried to over stamp that in a darker ink to get the darker look, I think you would end up messing it up, so it's just a top tip just to draw back over it with a pen. So then I'm going to use the wreath for the front door, but I felt like the wreath in the magazine freebie, it was just a bit like basic and boring, so I was still using the holly leaves that came in the kit, and I've just cut everything out of green card, and then I'm using pro markers to add different depths of green colours to them. But also those little sprigs you see, they are a Sue Wilson die set. I think it is called Berry Sprig, and I just cut a few of those so that the wreath would appear fuller. If I layer them with the holly leaves on it, it looks much more fancy really, and you know, like nice and Christmassy. There's also a lawn fawn die that's called, actually the mini wreath would work really nicely on a door like this, or there's the larger wreath as well. The branches from that would be great on this too. Or look in your foliage dies if you've got any, or flower dies. They often have like a little tiny sprig that would work, and you could just make a wreath from scratch if you don't have a little die that's a wreath as well. And you could easily cut 2 nesting circles inside each other to make a small donut shape, and then you could stick your little sprigs to that to create your own wreath. And again, for the door actually, you don't really need to have a door embossing folder or a die cut or anything. You can just use your paper trimmer because it's all rectangles, and you could just cut a large rectangle for the door and then cut smaller rectangles to create those panels on the door as well. So that little urn was stamping the freebie as well, but just stamping it on the coloured card, it just didn't go with my sort of shading on everything else, so I just used a couple of pro markers to add a little bit of shading to make it look more 3D and real, and then I just cut it out with my scissors as well, cutting up right to the line because then it looks a bit more real then too. So now I'm just building up the wreath like I was talking about earlier. I've coloured the branches in a couple of different colours as well, and I'm kind of adding the darker branches towards the back. Then I'm adding there's more of the slightly lighter branches, and then I'm using the holly to hide the joins on that as well. I just think adding the extra little sprigs on it really just makes it look a lot nicer. I love those kind of little details. I think that's mostly what my cards are about really, is adding all those little details on. It may take twice as long to make the card, but I think it looks way better in the end. So this is me building up that sentiment die like I said before. That's the little dot for the eye, and then I'll do it the same for the word in a second as well. I think using a colour of card that's on your card for the bottom 2 layers, it gives a really nice look as well, because if you see it from the side, you obviously see that turquoise colour poking through. It just looks nice. So I'm going to add my wreath to my door, decide where I'm going to put the word. There's that longer piece I said I was going to put at the bottom, just adding a little bit of hickory smoke. I just feel like that finishes it off. It kind of gives like the bottom of a porch maybe, and then you've got the step going up to the door as well. So I'm sticking down the whole door piece, which is mostly for the door frame, but it's much better to stick down the entire door, because if you just cut the frame out, it's going to be really flimsy and difficult to get back in the right sort of square shape. So I'm just going to add the wreath on top. Oh yeah, for the topiary kind of thing in that pot, there was a stamp in the freebie, but it looked too realistic for the kind of cartoony style I was going for. So in the end, I just used the same colours of green pro marker that I'd used to colour the wreath, and I just sort of blobbed down a load of different colours in a sort of topiary kind of shape, and then just cut it out. And I think that just finishes it off nicely. And I mean, it gets hidden a bit by the sentiment, so you know, it's not too noticeable that all it was just you blobbing some colours down. I like it when a sentiment overlaps the main focal part of a card. It makes it more part of the card, I think, rather than just, well, it's kind of an afterthought, but I don't know. Just looks nice. Then I'm just trimming down my card blank. Just made it slightly bigger than my panel, and then I'm just going to stick that on with some double-sided tape. And some glue. Then for the final touches, a little bit of a sparkle pen. This was the Spectrum Noir clear overlay sparkle pen, but I tend to go for the Tonic ones now. And then some tiny little 3mm red gems I got from Hobbycraft. So adding them to the holly leaves, because they've got a little place for berries on them, but then I felt like it needed a bit more to balance the red on the wreath, so I added in 2 extra clusters of 3 as well. And that's the card. You can kind of see from the side there what I mean by seeing the turquoise colour underneath the word. And then these are just photos showing you a couple of close-ups of the card. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.